Have you ever noticed how people become strangely uncomfortable when they see an older man living alone? Almost instantly, they begin filling in the blanks. He must be lonely. His family probably abandoned him. Life must be hard for him. But what if every one of those assumptions is wrong? What if, for some men, living alone after 60 isn't the end of happiness, but the beginning of a life they've waited decades to experience? Imagine a crisp autumn morning. The sun is just beginning to rise, and 72-year-old Daniel quietly opens his front door. There is no rush, no arguments, and no schedules demanding his attention. He pours himself a cup of coffee, steps onto the porch, and listens to birds singing in the distance. To most people, that scene might look ordinary. To Daniel, it feels like freedom. For nearly 40 years, his life revolved around deadlines, responsibilities, financial pressure, and constantly putting everyone else's needs before his own. He loved his family deeply, but somewhere along the way, he forgot what peace actually felt like. Retirement didn't just give him more time, it gave him himself back. As the years passed, Daniel realized something surprising. The quiet he once feared had become the greatest gift of all. Today, we're uncovering a side of aging that few people talk about. It's not about isolation or giving up on life. It's about discovering why so many older men are finding unexpected happiness in living independently, and why the world often misunderstands their choice. If you're over 60, or if someone you love is entering this stage of life, stay with us until the end. Some of these truths may completely change the way you think about growing older. Let's begin with the first reality. For many older men, living alone doesn't create loneliness. It reveals peace. When we're younger, silence often feels uncomfortable. We keep the television running in the background. We scroll endlessly through our phones. We surround ourselves with noise because we're afraid of what quiet might reveal. But aging changes something inside us. The mind no longer craves constant stimulation. Instead, it begins searching for calm. After decades of balancing careers, raising children, paying bills, solving problems, and meeting expectations, many older men discover that the greatest luxury isn't a larger house or a faster car. It's waking up without emotional chaos. Daniel remembers a time when every evening felt like another list of unfinished tasks. Someone always needed something. There was always another responsibility waiting tomorrow. Now, his mornings belong entirely to him. He reads without interruption. He gardens without checking the clock. He enjoys breakfast slowly, instead of eating while rushing out the door. And little by little, his stress begins to disappear. Scientists have long observed that our emotional priorities shift as we age. Instead of chasing excitement, many older adults naturally begin valuing meaningful experiences, stability, and inner calm. It's not because life becomes smaller. It's because they finally understand what truly matters. That doesn't mean every day is perfect. There are moments when the house feels unusually quiet. There are birthdays that bring memories. There are evenings when old photographs stir powerful emotions. But those moments don't define the entire journey. In fact, many older men describe solitude as something entirely different from loneliness. Loneliness is feeling unseen, even when surrounded by people. Solitude is choosing stillness because it brings clarity. Those are two completely different experiences. Daniel often laughs when neighbors ask if he gets bored. Bored? He smiles. For the first time in my life, I finally have enough time to enjoy being alive. That answer surprises people because society has spent years teaching us that happiness depends on always having someone nearby. But perhaps real happiness begins when we become comfortable with our own company. And that's only the beginning. The next truth explains why so many older men say they've never felt emotionally lighter than they do now. And it's something most people never expect. Reality number 2. The freedom that comes when you stop living to meet everyone else's expectations. There comes a point in Daniel's life when something quietly begins to change. It doesn't happen overnight, and there isn't a dramatic moment that announces it. One morning, Daniel simply wakes up and realizes he's tired of spending his life trying to be everything for everyone. For decades, he carried invisible weight. Be a good provider, be strong, hide your fears, never complain, always solve every problem, always put everyone else first. Year after year, those expectations became such a normal part of his life that he never stopped to realize how heavy they had become. Then, retirement arrived. His children built lives of their own. Work no longer defined his mornings. And for the first time in decades, Daniel found himself asking a question he had never asked before. What kind of life do I truly want to live? The answer surprised even him. Daniel stopped saying yes to things that drained his energy. He no longer attended every gathering simply because he felt obligated. He stopped trying to impress people who barely remembered his birthday. Instead, he began spending his days doing simple things that genuinely made him happy. Reading a good book in the afternoon, fishing by the lake, taking long walks without checking the time, sitting quietly on his porch and watching the sunset. To someone passing by, those moments looked ordinary. To Daniel, they felt priceless. One afternoon, an old friend asked him, "Daniel, don't you ever feel like you're missing something?" Daniel smiled and replied, "I spent 40 years chasing the life everyone else expected me to live. Now, for the first time, I'm living the life that feels right to me." That is one of the greatest gifts that often comes with growing older. You stop chasing approval, and you start protecting your peace. As the pressure slowly disappeared, Daniel noticed something remarkable. He slept better. His mind felt clearer. He became more patient. He laughed more often. Not because his life had suddenly become perfect, but because he was no longer carrying burdens that were never truly his. Of course, emotional freedom didn't mean pushing people away. Daniel still loved his family and valued genuine friendships. The difference was that he chose relationships built on respect instead of obligation, conversations that brought comfort instead of conflict, and people who appreciated him for who he was, not for what he could do for them. Looking back, Daniel often says something he never imagined he would say. "For the first time in my life, I finally feel like myself again." And once Daniel discovered that kind of peace, he realized it was something worth protecting every single day. Reality number 3. Independence often creates stronger habits, not weaker ones. One of the biggest myths about older men living alone is that they slowly stop taking care of themselves. People imagine an empty refrigerator, unwashed dishes, missed medications, and long days spent sitting in front of the television. But Daniel's story tells a very different one. When Daniel first began living alone, his friends worried about him constantly. They asked, "Who's going to cook for you? Will you remember your doctor's appointments? What if you become lazy?" Daniel simply smiled, knowing that only time could answer those questions. 6 months later, those same friends could hardly believe the transformation they saw. Every morning, Daniel woke up with the sunrise. He stretched for a few minutes, then took a peaceful walk through his neighborhood while the streets were still quiet. Instead of relying on fast food, he learned to prepare simple, nutritious meals. Nothing complicated, just fresh vegetables, lean protein, fruit, and plenty of water. Little by little, those small daily choices began to change his life. He felt lighter. His blood pressure improved. His energy returned. Even his doctor noticed the difference. Daniel realized an important truth. Independence doesn't create carelessness. More often, it creates discipline. When no one else is managing your schedule, your health becomes your own responsibility. And many older men take that responsibility more seriously than ever before. Daniel continued walking because he wanted to stay active and independent. He chose healthier meals because he wanted more than just a longer life. He wanted a better one. He followed a simple daily routine because consistency gave him confidence. And he discovered that taking care of himself wasn't about impressing anyone else. It was an act of self-respect. Of course, not every day was easy. Some mornings, his body felt stiff. Some days, old aches made even a short walk feel challenging. But Daniel reminded himself that healthy aging was never about being perfect. It was about showing up for himself, one day at a time. Experts often say that small daily habits, like walking regularly, eating balanced meals, staying mentally active, and getting enough sleep, can have a greater impact on long-term health than occasional bursts of intense effort. That was encouraging because Daniel realized he didn't need extraordinary routines to transform his life. He simply needed consistent ones. Looking back, Daniel often says something that makes people stop and think. I stopped waiting for someone else to take care of me, and I started taking care of myself. That single decision changed everything. His confidence grew stronger. His independence became part of his identity. And instead of seeing himself as someone growing older, Daniel began seeing himself as someone who was still growing. Perhaps that's the greatest surprise of all. Living alone doesn't always make a man weaker. Sometimes it's exactly what reminds him how capable he truly is. And what Daniel discovered next had nothing to do with health. It had everything to do with love, connection, and one of the biggest misconceptions about growing older. Reality number 4. Love doesn't disappear with age. It simply changes its shape. One of the greatest misunderstandings about older men who live alone is the belief that they have stopped loving or being loved. But Daniel's life tells a very different story. As the years passed, Daniel discovered that love had not disappeared. It had simply become quieter. It no longer needed grand gestures or constant attention. Instead, it revealed itself in the smallest moments. A phone call from his daughter asking, "Dad, how are you today?" A grandson excited to share his latest achievement. A neighbor stopping by just to see if everything was all right. An old friend who never forgot his birthday. To someone looking from the outside, these moments might seem ordinary. But to Daniel, they meant everything. They reminded him that love isn't always loud. Sometimes it's found in the quiet acts of kindness that people rarely notice. After losing his wife several years earlier, many people assumed Daniel had given up on happiness. They saw him living alone and believed his world had become empty, but they were only seeing what was visible from the outside. Every Wednesday morning, Daniel volunteered at the local library, helping children discover the joy of reading. On weekends, he met a small group of lifelong friends for coffee, where conversations lasted for hours and laughter came easily. Almost every evening he spoke with his son, not because anyone felt obligated, but because they genuinely enjoyed hearing each other's voices. One afternoon, someone asked Daniel a question he had heard many times before. "Don't you ever feel alone?" Daniel smiled gently before answering, "I may live by myself, but I never feel unloved." Those simple words revealed a powerful truth. Love is not measured by how many people live under the same roof. It's measured by the quality of the relationships we build. As people grow older, many men stop chasing relationships based on expectations or appearances. Instead, they begin valuing honesty, kindness, trust, and the comfort of being accepted exactly as they are. Some find purpose through family, others through lifelong friendships, some through faith, community groups, or mentoring younger generations. They discover that offering encouragement, sharing wisdom, or simply listening to someone else's story can create bonds that are just as meaningful as romance. Perhaps this is one of life's greatest lessons. Love is not limited to one form. It grows beyond labels. It becomes less about excitement and more about presence, less about proving your feelings, and more about showing up when it matters most. For Daniel, that realization filled his heart with gratitude. He understood that a meaningful life isn't defined by how many people surround you. It's defined by the people who truly care when they do. And once Daniel understood that, he realized something extraordinary. A house can be quiet, yet a heart can still be completely full. But the greatest lesson Daniel learned was still waiting for him, because the final truth had the power to change the way he looked at the rest of his life.